Chapter 38, Leather Couches. One day my wife and I went to a relative's funeral at a really nice church. It had a fantastic view of their new building from the street when pulling into the parking lot. As we walked into the tall, glass-enclosed lobby, the new carpet smell was euphoric. Tanya stood there just inside the door for a moment, breathing deeply and gazing about. It didn't just have lights, it had chandeliers. Off to one side was a coffee bar and barista station with modern bar stools and tables. A top-notch information booth composed of wood and metal stood at the center of the lobby. It was adorned with extremely professional graphics and brochures. Scattered about the area were couches and coffee tables arranged in semi-private sitting areas. The carpet felt luxurious even under our shoes. It all smelled new and looked expensive. The other side of the lobby held a dedicated lounge with large windows enclosing it. The lounge was for new people to greet the pastor after church services. Tanya kept making whispered ooh and ah sounds under her breath, like a person eating a high-priced steak dinner at a classy restaurant after having only fast food for weeks. As we walked across the lobby, I had to take my wife's arm because I think she was in a dream state, walking in a floating kind of way with the grace and purpose of a Disney princess. The look of delight and wonder on her face was inspiring. Her mouth remained slightly open in awestruck admiration as we part walked and part waltzed into the visitors' lounge. It had a gas-burning rock fireplace casting comforting glow across teakwood tables and leather couches. "Oh," she gushed, "leather couches! They have leather couches!" She spoke with delight in a sighing kind of way, like she'd entered her personal heaven. She sat on one and rubbed her hands over the luxurious contours, and then added emphatically, "Why can't we have leather couches?" Taking her firmly by the shoulders and turning her to face me, I gazed into her beautiful green eyes. With all of the care of a doctor giving a diagnosis to an oblivious patient, I said, "Because this church never has to worry that one of their visitors will come in so drunk he passes out on their leather couch and poops his pants." Yes, we've had that happen. It wasn't on one of our nicer Goodwill pieces of furniture, though. It was on a wooden pew. I guess that's how they got their name in olden times. He came into a meal and passed out drunk on one of the pews we had lining the gym walls. I was glad we didn't have carpet. Now, normally, I would have done what most anyone working under such conditions would do. Grab him by the ankles and gently drag him outside, even if he was over 6 feet and probably weighing in at 225. But I was thwarted from accomplishing my plan because the poop had run down his pant leg and into his socks. This prevented me from being willing to grab his ankles, so I was forced to improvise a new solution. I did what any thinking person would do, and I called the fire department because I was pretty sure he was injured, wink wink. At least he smelled injured to me, but then again, I'm not a professional and can't be sure I could properly identify gangrene, nudge nudge. "God hates us," was my wife's summary of our life and ministry after her experience in the leather couch church. It was the little stuff like that which kept us from attracting people who would stay with us and grow our ministry. It was the middle of summer 2012 and our second year of borrowing from our line of credit, that I knew we were failing and we weren't going to make it. Sure, the ministry to the poor was doing well, and there were great stories to tell, but I could do the math, and for all the investment in the building and the increase in ministry programs, we couldn't grow enough to even get close to being healthy. We kept hemorrhaging finances. I was told that this church ran a deficit budget for dozens of years, long before my time here. In the past, someone usually died, leaving a big chunk of change for the church to limp along. This is how they've been covering the deficit for years. After working at the church for just over 4 years, we had 1 month and 1 month only where the income matched the outflow of money. Every single one of my other 50 months, we had lost cash, usually several $1,000s each month. For my first 2 years, the cash from the previous administration's sale of the parsonage covered those losses. After July of 2011, our equity line of credit with our denomination covered it. When our board first sat down in December to lay out our 2013 budget, it looked as if we would run $60,000 deficit. I could hear the flushing, swirling sound of my own personal morale going down the toilet. Nothing we were doing was working. Nothing we tried made a bit of difference. We spent $140,000 of our equity line of credit over the last few years, and we needed another $20,000 to get us going through the coming year. The denominational leaders were now coughing and sputtering. We realized the $200,000 equity line of credit wasn't going to be that much after all. I didn't blame them. We were a lost cause. Our church board decided to once again reach out for a consultant to help, and we met with some regional denominational leaders who stared down at their feet and talked in the respectful whispered voice of a mortician selling a casket. They didn't want to outright advise us to close, but had no belief in us either. Well, one of them began after clearing her throat in that now here comes the bad news kind of way. You just have to get more people to come here and give. We were awestruck by her sage counsel. You're just going to have to decide what you're going to do, another added, in the same tone as a doctor reading a do not resuscitate order to the family standing about the bedside. With little hope and no ideas, we quietly put the building back up on the market to sell at the beginning of 2013. If our church shut down, it would have to be done anyway. The process takes many months, so it was time to get it started. I called the real estate agent the next day to get a plan together, and we put the sale of the building on the agenda of our church's upcoming annual meeting scheduled in a few weeks. I was hoping that with any luck, we could wrap this ministry up and close her down in 6 months or so. In the meantime, I spent the next few weeks looking over our scrawny, anemic, and sickly budget. After crunching a ton of numbers, I discovered the treasurer had not included a big chunk of change in a separate savings account when giving us the paperwork on our budget. By whittling the last remaining expenses down here and there, and coupled with wildly imaginating some creative income ideas, like using more contract leases, renting out our space and rooms in our children's ministry for things like band practice rooms, I found a way to get that $60,000 deficit down to under $25,000. Only a $25,000 deficit. That's doable, I thought. With a boost in some non-traditional income strategies, we finally figured out we could get that deficit down to nothing. For the first time in my 51 months as pastor of a poor downtown church, we actually had it within sight of being a break-even year. But it was going to take extra effort. We finally had the potential of borrowing nothing and not selling anything to survive. But it's going to take a lot more than what we had been doing. It was going to be the last-ditch, do-or-die, desperate, breakout attempt to survive in Zombieland. We never had a lot of tithers here, still don't. That's people who give 10% of their income. About 8 to 10 individuals and couples cover the vast majority of our giving income. For a couple of years, behind the scenes, I was wheeling and dealing like a real estate mogul. I knew that all we had was our facility, and we had to find ways to make it work for us. I thought our strategic, high-visibility location would be ideal with the right investments and the right ideas. I went to work networking whomever I could. A farmer's market was going on across the street. I knew that would make our parking lot desirable. I had called the local representative for a large corporate entity which manages parking lots across the country. We met for coffee and worked out a deal to share parking lot revenue. They would manage it for $100 a month fee, and then we would split all proceeds beyond that, 30% to them, 70% to us. The problem was our lot was poorly striped and only had 30 spaces. I met with a couple of companies who stripe lots, and they were sure they could improve on that. I had them give me a copy of the codes and sat down one day calculating dimensions and square footage. As a musician, I can't tell you enough how outside the box this was for me. I found a way to get 60 spaces out of the same area. We did the deal, and I got a company to repaint the stripes for a couple $100 and donate the rest of their expenses. We would make several thousand more each year from lease deal with our parking lot. I was constantly negotiating, promoting ways to get rental income to groups like the Spokane Youth Symphony, or I was drawing up contracts for renting band rehearsal space, or we hosted special outside events to raise rental income. I was doing just about anything I could. Several times I got grant money through Streetwise, and we used as much as was legally and ethically possible to pay things like the heat, water, and garbage. But even with all of those, it was not enough to cover our costs. It seemed like for every deal I made, giving dipped, making it a neutral gain. One year, I negotiated over $20,000 in those kinds of contracts and had no administrative support, so I wrote all of the terms, the contracts, and the agreements myself. I learned a lot about business, nonprofit tax laws, real estate contracts, skills my seminary education never once suspected a pastor would need. I was always told by my professors, well, you will have other people on your board who will do those kinds of things. No, you won't. If you're going into ministry and reading this, I guarantee that you will need to know how to read a budget, a spreadsheet, and understand small business finances, especially if you end up in a small church. Small churches don't get leather couches, even if you don't think people may poop on them.